My friends, let's be honest. There was a time when you answered every late night message, when your heart leapt every time your phone lit up with his name, even though deep down you knew you weren't the first choice. There comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when your heart leapt every time your phone lit up with his name, even though deep down you knew you weren't the first choice. There comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when something shifts inside of you. It doesn't happen in the middle of an argument or during a tearful goodbye. No, it happens in the stillness. When you're sitting alone, staring at a message that never came. When you realize you've been holding your breath, waiting for someone to finally see you, finally choose you, and they never do. That's when it hits you. You weren't really part of their future. You were a convenience, a placeholder, a backup plan they never truly valued but kept around just in case. And you accepted that not because you lacked self-respect, but because you were still learning what real self-worth felt like. Self-worth doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come wrapped in confidence or defiance at first. It whispers. It nudges. It asks quiet questions like, why are you always the one waiting? Or why does their attention feel like a reward you have to earn? That's where the realization begins. Love, or what we thought was love, made us tolerant. It made us generous with our time, our energy, our forgiveness. We made excuses for the unread messages, the broken promises, the last-minute plans. We called it being understanding, giving space, or not wanting to pressure him. But deep down, we knew. We knew we were showing up fully for someone who only showed up when it was easy or convenient. The painful truth is this: when you're treated like a backup plan, it chips away at your identity in small, almost invisible ways. You start questioning your standards. You start believing that asking for basic consistency is too much. And worst of all, you begin to think that if you were just a little more chill, more fun, more whatever, they would finally choose you. But here's where everything changes. Something inside of you decides it's done negotiating for scraps. You feel a flicker, small, maybe even uncomfortable, that says, I deserve better than this. And even though part of you still aches for his attention, another part begins to see it for what it truly is: empty, inconsistent, and conditional. That's when self-worth starts to rise. It doesn't need his validation anymore. It doesn't care about what he might say tomorrow. It begins to build itself from within, from your silence, from your decision to stop chasing, from your refusal to be someone's maybe ever again. And it's powerful because once you've tasted the peace that comes from not needing to prove your value to someone who couldn't see it, you can't go back. You won't settle for half efforts and delayed responses. You won't be available for someone who only comes close when everyone else walks away. He may not have noticed the first time you stayed up late crying. He may not have noticed when you read and reread every message, wondering what you did wrong. But he will notice your absence. And it won't be because you disappeared dramatically. It will be because you stopped being the version of yourself that begged for a place in his life. You didn't wake up one day and suddenly feel whole. You built that wholeness. Every time you resisted the urge to reach out, every time you chose not to respond to a lazy "hey you up" text, every time you turned your focus inward and poured your energy into your own healing. And that's what makes this shift so permanent. You were his backup plan. But that version of you, the one who waited, who hoped, who settled, doesn't live here anymore. In her place stands someone who finally sees herself clearly. Someone who doesn't beg to be chosen. Someone who chooses herself. And no matter how hard he tries, no matter how many times he looks back and realizes what he lost, he won't reach you again, because the moment you recognized your worth was then moment you became unreachable. Would you like the next keynote expanded in the same tone and depth? Of course, here is the expanded version of the second keynote, the power shift, crafted in a compelling, emotionally honest style, up to 700 words. There's something incredibly disorienting about caring more than someone else, especially when that care isn't openly dismissed, it's just vaguely returned, just enough to keep you hopeful, just enough to keep you hanging on. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't even always distant, he was just inconsistent, hot and cold, here and then gone. Every time you were almost done, he'd drop back in and your heart would race. Maybe this time, maybe he finally sees it. That maybe held more power over you than it ever should have. The tables turn quietly, not because you wanted revenge, not because you planned it, but because something in you began to wake up when he returned from one of his vanishing acts. You weren't asking where he'd been, you weren't filling the silence anymore, and that more than anything made him feel what he never expected to: uncertainty, doubt, loss. People don't notice when they're mistreating you in real time. They notice when the supply dries up, when the one who used to give endlessly suddenly doesn't anymore, when the texts feel different, when the energy they used to drain so easily becomes unavailable. He'll tell himself he doesn't care, that he's fine. But trust this, when someone's used to having power over your emotions and then loses it, they feel that loss deeply. Not because they loved you the way you loved them, but because they loved what you gave. The safety, the ego boost, the emotional security, all of it gone. And you're not playing games. You're not ghosting. You've simply reclaimed your center. You're no longer orbiting him. He's no longer the sun in your sky. You've remembered your value, and that value is no longer up for negotiation. This isn't a win for your pride, it's a win for your peace. The shift didn't happen in a fight or with a dramatic speech. It happened quietly when you chose yourself again and again until the choice wasn't hard anymore, until it felt natural, until it felt free. He may reach out, he may try again, realizing too late that the energy has changed. But the version of you that once longed for his attention, she doesn't live here anymore. And the version he's trying to reach now, she's already gone. Absolutely. Here's the expanded version of the third keynote, Healing Over Validation, written with emotional depth and clarity, up to 700 words. There's a specific kind of ache that comes from being overlooked by someone you gave your heart to. It's not just disappointment, it's deeper. It's that hollow silence after they leave you on read. It's the sting when they return only when it's convenient for them. It's the way you stay up wondering if you're simply not enough or if they just never cared in the first place. And somewhere in that pain, your mind starts grasping for answers, for closure, for a reason, for validation. You think, if he could just explain why, if he could just acknowledge that he hurt me, if he could just say he sees my worth now, then maybe I could let go in peace. And so begins the quiet addiction to validation, not because you're weak, but because you were made to feel invisible. Because somewhere along the way, someone taught you that healing is tied to being recognized by the one who broke you. It's not. You may still crave it. You may wait for the apology that never comes. You may reread the messages, hoping to find some hidden meaning that makes it all make sense. You may stalk his social media, trying to decode his smile, wondering if he's even thinking about you at all. You may go over the conversations, convincing yourself that if you had said things differently, shown up differently, been less emotional or more aloof, maybe the ending would have changed. But here's the truth, no one wants to say out loud. Some people won't give you closure because they never valued the connection enough to consider what it meant to you. And their silence, painful as it is your answer. It's a hard pill to swallow, but once you do, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop making their validation a requirement for your healing. You stop needing them to admit they were wrong in order to believe that you were right to want more. You stop needing a final conversation to prove that what you felt was real. Healing isn't about them. It never was. It's about you choosing to stop bleeding for someone who never tried to stop the cut. It's about understanding that your pain is valid, even if they never acknowledge it, that your story matters, even if they act like it never happened, that your growth doesn't require their permission. You stop chasing closure when you realize you've already survived the worst part. Being treated like you didn't matter, and now you get to rebuild on your own terms, without the drama, without the apologies, without the texts that say, I miss you, followed by nothing meaningful, without the emotional whiplash that comes from someone who can't decide if they want to keep you or let you go. The silence that once haunted you becomes peace. The days you used to spend checking your phone turn into days where your energy is focused inward. You begin to measure your worth not by who returns to you, but by how gently you return to yourself. And slowly, piece by piece, your heart becomes yours again. This kind of healing is quiet. There are no big declarations. There's no dramatic ending. It's just a slow, steady choice to stop giving power to someone who is careless with it. It's choosing to wake up each day and give your time, your thoughts, and your love to someone who never abandoned you. And maybe one day he'll come back. Maybe he'll reach out with a message saying he finally sees what you were trying to give him all along. Maybe he'll call when he's lonely, when his other options fall away, when he suddenly realizes how rare your love was. It won't matter, because by then you'll have healed in silence, without his help, without his closure, without needing him to tell you that you are worthy, because you'll already know. That is the quiet power of choosing healing over validation. You no longer need him to get it, because you do. And that's more than enough. Would you like to continue with the next keynote in the same tone and format? Certainly. Here is the expanded version of the fourth keynote, Reclaiming Dignity, written with depth, clarity, and emotional resonance, up to 700 words. There comes a time when holding on hurts more than letting go. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. That moment. The one where you take a long look at the way you've been treated and decide, no more. That's not weakness. That's not bitterness. That's dignity waking up inside you. Dignity doesn't come with fireworks or bold declarations. It comes in quiet choices. The choice to not reply when he sends a message at 11:47 p.m. just to see how you're doing. The choice to leave his words unanswered, not out of malice, but because you've realized that his attention only ever comes when it costs him nothing. You know now that love isn't built on breadcrumbs or half-hearted attempts. Love is consistent, and dignity refuses to settle for anything less. You don't walk away because you stopped loving him. You walk away because he never truly showed up for you, not in the way you needed, not in the way you deserve. And staying in a situation where you constantly have to prove your worth becomes soul-crushing. When you start to beg with your actions, with your silence, with your patience, that's when your self-respect begins to erode. That's when dignity becomes not just a word, but a decision. The world teaches us to romanticize endurance, to hold on just in case, to keep proving ourselves, to keep trying. But what if the strength isn't in the holding on? What if the true strength is in the release? There is nothing glamorous about constantly having to remind someone how to treat you. There's nothing empowering about shrinking yourself so they feel comfortable. There's no honor in being the one who always stays, even when it's clear you're no longer seen, no longer cherished. Walking away, truly walking away, is terrifying because it means stepping into the unknown. It means no longer clinging to the version of him you hoped would show up one day. It means looking yourself in the mirror and saying, I choose me, even when your heart still whispers his name. And when you make that choice, you stop being the backup plan. You stop being an option. You become the one he can no longer access. Not because you've become unreachable, but because you finally remembered that you were never supposed to be chasing him to begin with. You were supposed to be choosing, would you like me to continue with the fifth keynote next? Certainly. Here's the expanded version of the fifth keynote. The illusion of almost, written with emotional precision and introspective depth, up to 700 words. Almost is a word that can haunt you. It sounds harmless, even hopeful, like it carries potential, but in relationships, almost becomes a prison. It's where you end up stuck between what could have been and what never truly was. And if you've ever been in the grip of someone who couldn't fully love you, but wouldn't fully let you go either, you know exactly how dangerous almost can be. He almost committed, he almost made you a priority. He almost said the words. He almost became the man you were holding your breath for. You stayed, you tolerated the waiting, you forgave the confusion, you ignored your own emotional exhaustion because the possibility of something real always felt just one good conversation away. You kept telling yourself, maybe next time, maybe he just needs to grow a little more. Maybe he just needs space, time, clarity. So you stayed and you waited. And in the process, you began to shrink. Almost relationships are the most seductive kind because they mimic the shape of real love. The chemistry is there. The vulnerability shows up in flashes. There are moments, powerful, electric, unforgettable moments when you feel deeply seen, like he gets you. But just as quickly, it all disappears. He pulls away, he goes cold, he gets distracted. And you're left trying to string those moments together into something that feels like a foundation. But it's not a foundation. It's a highlight reel. And a highlight reel isn't enough to build a future on. And the painful truth is this: if someone truly wants to be with you, they won't stay in the limbo of almost. Love doesn't hesitate. It doesn't show up only when it's convenient. It doesn't hide behind excuses and unfinished healing. It chooses every day, through the hard stuff, through the doubts, through the past wounds. But he didn't choose, not fully. Maybe he said he cared. Maybe he acted like he was trying. But deep down, you always knew. You knew you were more invested. You knew you were carrying the emotional weight of the connection. You knew the inconsistency wasn't accidental. It was his way of keeping you close enough to not lose you, but distant enough to never commit. You kept trying. Because when you're attached to potential, you become blind to reality. You convince yourself that the love you feel is enough to fix the love he won't give. You see his fragments and call it depth. You feel his absence and label it mystery. But in the end, you're just building a home in someone else's indecision and calling it love. But something eventually snaps, not because he changed, but because you did. You reach a point where the high of almost no longer soothes the ache of being emotionally homeless. You get tired of wondering where you stand, tired of waiting for consistency, tired of rewriting your worth every time he disappears and reappears. And when that moment comes, you stop romanticizing what was never real. You stop telling yourself that crumbs are signs of a feast. You stop letting the spark fool you into thinking there's fire. You begin to see clearly. If he wanted to be with you, he would have been. He had chances, he had time, he had your patience, your loyalty, your softness, and he still couldn't meet you there. Not fully, not consistently, not honestly. That's when you realize the most important truth of all. Almost is still a form of no. It's just dressed in nicer words. And the love you want, the love you deserve, doesn't live in certainty, in action, in someone who doesn't need to be convinced to show up. So you stop waiting, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. You walk away, not because there was nothing there, but because there wasn't enough. And you finally understand that holding on to almost means holding yourself back from the everything you were always meant for. Because the truth is, you weren't asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. Would you like me to proceed with expanding the sixth and final keynote? Absolutely. Here is the conclusion of the entire speech, emotionally resonant, reflective, and empowering, tying together all the keynotes and themes. And now here you are. Not the woman who waited, who hoped, who stayed too long, but the woman who walked away. You didn't leave because you stopped loving him. You left because you finally started loving yourself more than the story you were trying to write with someone who never picked up the pen. You left because the silence between his mixed signals grew louder than your desire to keep pretending. You left because almost was no longer enough to carry the weight of what your heart truly needed.